Right before an avoidant person starts feeling something real for you, something strange often happens. They do not always move closer. They step back, and if you do not understand this stage, you will read it the wrong way. You will think the silence means they do not care. You will think the slower replies mean you lost them. You will think the distance is the answer. But sometimes the distance is not the absence of feeling. It is the proof that the feeling became too real to manage. That is why this part hurts so much. Everything can seem good. The talks feel deeper. The energy feels warmer. The bond starts feeling important. Then suddenly they pull away, and you are left trying to understand what changed overnight. Stay with me because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. They react to the distance without seeing the fear underneath it. And once that happens, the whole cycle gets worse. What looks cold on the outside can be panic on the inside. What feels like rejection can actually be a person losing control of the walls they built to survive. And if you do not see that clearly, you can spend months chasing answers that were never really about your worth in the first place. Most people misunderstand this phase completely, and because they misunderstand it, they respond in ways that usually make everything heavier. When someone with avoidant patterns starts pulling back right when the bond becomes emotionally real, the first thought is almost always the same. People assume disinterest. They assume rejection. They assume the other person was pretending all along. But the deeper truth is much more complicated. What you are often seeing is not a lack of feeling. It is the start of fear. Avoidant people usually do not struggle with light connection. Easy conversations feel safe. Casual closeness feels manageable. Surface-level chemistry does not demand too much emotional exposure. It lets them enjoy company while still holding on to control, independence, and distance. But the second the connection starts carrying emotional weight, something inside begins to shift. The talks mean more. The silence means more. The bond begins to matter. And that is the exact moment their defenses start waking up, because now they are no longer just enjoying someone. Now they risk being fully seen. Now they risk being emotionally known. For someone who learned to survive through emotional self-reliance, that kind of closeness can feel deeply unsafe, even if part of them wants it badly. So instead of moving closer, they create space. Sometimes that space is obvious. Sometimes it is quiet and subtle, which is why it confuses people even more. Their replies slow down. Their emotional warmth drops. They stop saying what they feel so openly. They begin focusing on work, stress, routine, anything that gives them distance without having to explain it. In some cases, they even start telling themselves the connection is wrong, too much, too fast, or somehow not right. But this usually does not happen randomly. These are protective behaviors. They are trying to lower their internal discomfort. And here is the part that confuses almost everyone. The deeper the connection feels to them, the stronger the urge to retreat can become. From the outside, that looks irrational. Someone opens up, they lean in, they let you feel closer, then suddenly they go cold. But inside their psychology, it makes sense. For avoidant people, closeness and emotional danger often become linked together. The exact thing they want emotionally is also the thing their nervous system connects to overwhelm, loss of control, pressure, rejection, or dependence. So the moment the relationship starts matching their deeper emotional needs, fear interrupts the process. And if you miss that, you will read the whole pattern backwards. Think about what that means in real life. If a person has spent years building emotional independence as a survival strategy, intimacy will not just feel unfamiliar. It will feel like a threat to the structure that kept them safe. It asks them to lower defenses they trusted for years. It asks them to lean on something outside themselves. It asks them to stay open while feeling uncertain. That creates tension. And people respond to tension in different ways. Some move closer and ask for reassurance. Others make space. The avoidant self usually makes space. That does not mean unhealthy behavior should be excused. It does not mean inconsistency becomes acceptable just because there is a reason for it. But it does mean you stop reading every shift through the lens of personal rejection. Because when you mistake fear for indifference, your response becomes reactive. You chase clarity. You overthink every message. You try harder to prove your value. You become more emotional, more urgent, more available. And sadly, those reactions often increase the avoidant person's urge to pull away even more. This is why awareness matters so much. You have to see that withdrawal is not always proof the connection meant nothing. In many situations, it is proof the connection carried enough emotional weight to activate their defenses in the first place. Once you really understand that, your perspective starts changing. You stop personalizing every drop in energy. You stop reacting to every pause as if it confirms your worst fear. Instead, you start seeing the pattern under the behavior. It is not always a reflection of your worth. It is often a reflection of their fear response. People rarely run from what feels meaningless. More often, they run from what has the power to affect them deeply. And for the avoidant self, strong emotional impact can feel dangerously close to losing control. So they retreat not because they feel nothing, but because they do not yet know how to stay emotionally present without feeling threatened by it. That leads to a powerful question, and it is one many people never stop to ask. Are you reacting emotionally to their behavior, or are you understanding it psychologically? The answer changes everything, because if you only react emotionally, you get pulled into their cycle. If you understand the pattern, you stay grounded in your own clarity. And this is where the focus slowly shifts. It is no longer only about why they are doing this. It becomes about whether you can stay emotionally centered while watching it happen. That is the part that protects you. That is the part that keeps you from losing yourself inside someone else's fear. But after the first withdrawal, another layer appears, and this is where things become even more exhausting. It is not only distance, it is inconsistency. One day they feel emotionally present, warm, engaged, almost deeply invested. The next day they seem unreachable, distracted, detached, or hard to read. Without understanding the psychology behind this, the mixed signals can wear you down fast. But inconsistency is rarely random. It is usually the visible result of inner conflict. The avoidant self often carries two opposite drives at the same time. One part truly wants closeness. They want intimacy. They want to be understood. They want emotional comfort, connection, and the feeling of being seen by someone who matters. That desire is real, but at the very same time, another part fears what that intimacy represents. Closeness can unconsciously symbolize dependence, pressure, exposure, or the loss of freedom. So inside, they are being pulled in two directions at once. That is why their behavior can feel unstable. They lean in when connection feels safe. They pull back when it begins to feel overwhelming. Their desire moves them forward. Their fear pushes them backward. And because this is happening inside them, often without full awareness, their external behavior starts looking unpredictable. What makes this inconsistency so powerful is that human beings naturally want certainty. We want to know where we stand. We want emotional stability so the mind can rest. Consistency lets your body relax, but inconsistency keeps you emotionally searching. You begin replaying conversations. You study tiny changes in tone. You question your own words. You wonder if you should say more, say less, stay calm, give space, or try harder. Without noticing it, you can become attached to the uncertainty itself. You start waiting for the warm version of them to return because you have already seen flashes of it, and those flashes feel so good that they become emotionally addictive. They give enough reward to keep you invested, but not enough safety to let you feel secure. That is why mixed signals can become so consuming. But it is important to read this clearly. You are not dealing with someone who feels stable inside and simply acts unstable outside. You are dealing with someone who is divided between desire and fear. And if you respond by chasing consistency harder, you usually strengthen the unhealthy pattern. The more you overinvest trying to stabilize the bond, the less pressure there is for them to face their own emotional patterns. So the real shift is not about decoding every mood change. It is about seeing what the inconsistency is actually telling you. It is telling you there is emotional misalignment. And when someone is not aligned inside themselves, they cannot offer steady emotional security, no matter how genuine some moments may feel. That does not automatically make them cruel. It often means they are emotionally unprepared. This is where your own clarity becomes non-negotiable. You stop bargaining for consistency through extra effort. You stop acting as if emotional stability is something you need to earn by being patient enough, understanding enough, or low maintenance enough. Instead, you start recognizing consistency for what it really is, a sign of emotional readiness. And then you ask a better question. Are you connected to who they consistently are? Or are you attached to who they become in rare emotional moments? Those are not the same reality? That question cuts through the fantasy fast. Because once you see the difference, their inconsistency loses a lot of its emotional power over you. You stop getting pulled into every rise and fall. You stop confusing intensity with depth. And instead of constantly asking why they act this way, you begin asking something much more important. What am I willing to accept? That question changes your whole position inside the dynamic. Real clarity begins the moment you stop investing in confusion and start valuing steadiness, openness, and mutual emotional presence over dramatic emotional highs. This becomes even more painful after real moments of closeness, because that is when the pattern feels most contradictory. It is not only that the avoidant self struggles with intimacy, it is that right after a meaningful emotional moment, they often withdraw. And that can feel deeply disorienting. You share something honest. There is presence, vulnerability, maybe even relief. For a moment, the connection feels calm and real. It feels like progress. It feels like something finally opened. Then, almost without warning, the energy changes. They become quieter, less expressive, less available. Sometimes they disappear into distance, as if the same experience that brought you closer also pushed them away. If you only read that emotionally, it hurts. It feels like rejection. It feels like the moment meant less than you thought. It can make you question whether any of it was real, but if you step back and look at the pattern psychologically, it starts making sense. For the avoidant self, intimacy does not only create connection, it also creates activation in the nervous system. The closeness can be genuine and still trigger fear. Emotional openness signals vulnerability. Vulnerability signals exposure. Exposure can awaken fears of dependence, loss of control, abandonment, shame, or emotional overwhelm. So the withdrawal that follows is often not manipulation. It is regulation. Their system tries to restore emotional safety by creating distance. Think of it this way. They can handle closeness, but only within a certain emotional range. Once the interaction crosses a deeper line and starts feeling truly important, their internal defenses wake up and pull them back toward what feels controlled and familiar. That process often looks like silence, detachment, sudden independence, or emotional shutting down. The key thing to understand is this. The intimacy was not fake. In many cases, it was actually the most honest part of the connection. The problem is not that the closeness lacked meaning. The problem is that it carried too much emotional weight for them to comfortably hold for long. And if you do not recognize that difference, you start doubting moments that were actually real. You replay the conversation. You look for the mistake. You assume you said the wrong thing. You blame yourself for the shift. But when you zoom out, the pattern becomes clear. Closeness triggers fear. Fear creates distance. Then the cycle repeats. And this is where your own awareness matters more than ever. Because when someone pulls away after intimacy, your natural instinct is usually to repair the bond quickly. You want to reach out, reconnect, reassure, and bring the warmth back. But for the avoidant self, that immediate pursuit can feel like pressure. And pressure usually makes the retreat even stronger. So without meaning to, both people begin feeding the cycle. One person withdraws to feel safe, the other person pursues closeness to feel secure, and the whole dynamic keeps repeating itself. This is why emotional awareness is not just helpful here, it is essential. Once you understand that their distance is not always a reflection of the connection's value, but often a response to the intensity of it, you stop reacting on impulse. You stop trying to close every emotional gap the second it appears. Instead, you learn to allow space without losing your own center. You begin to understand that intimacy for them is not simply something they enjoy naturally. It is something their system often struggles to sustain. In many ways, they feel like they need recovery time after closeness. And when you truly understand that, your perspective changes. That still does not mean you tolerate unhealthy behavior forever. It does not mean you ignore your own needs. It does not mean you accept chronic confusion as normal. What it does mean is that you stop carrying responsibility for patterns that started inside them. You stop personalizing every retreat. You stop treating every silence as proof of your inadequacy. And you begin making decisions from a more grounded place. Because healthy relationships are not built only on emotional highs. They are built on the ability to stay connected without fear, constantly breaking the bond apart. If every moment of closeness is followed by withdrawal, the relationship slowly becomes unstable no matter how real the feelings are. The cycle starts draining the connection instead of deepening it. Connection rises, fear interrupts it, distance follows, reconnection happens, then everything starts again. Over time, that pattern does not build trust. It wears people out. That is why the real question is not whether the intimate moments are genuine. Many times, they absolutely are. The more important question is whether those moments can grow into something steady, emotionally sustainable, and consistent over time. Because true intimacy is not just reaching depth for brief moments. It is staying there together without one person being constantly pulled back by fear, and sooner or later, a painful realization begins to surface. Someone being able to connect with you sometimes is not the same as being emotionally present consistently. If intimacy appears only in short bursts and then disappears again, what you are experiencing is not stability. It is emotional intermittence. And eventually you have to ask yourself whether occasional connection is enough to build something meaningful long term. That is the turning point. You stop measuring the relationship by the brightest moments and start looking at the full pattern. Because love should not feel like something you keep recovering. It should feel like something that can hold. As you keep noticing the repeated cycle of closeness, fear, and distance, another truth becomes hard to ignore. Even when the avoidant person truly cares about you, there is often still a part of them that remains unreachable. You can feel it. There are moments that seem real and warm, but at the same time, there is still a barrier. The relationship feels almost complete, almost safe, almost fully open, but never entirely. Many people mistake this for confusion about the relationship itself, but psychologically, it is usually self-protection. Letting another person have full emotional access requires more than temporary closeness. It requires exposure. It means revealing fears, insecurities, deeper wounds, and the parts of the self that feel hardest to show. For the avoidant self, that level of openness can feel dangerous, not always because they distrust you, but because vulnerability has often been tied to pain, shame, rejection, emotional overload, or loss of control in their past. So instead of fully opening, they compartmentalize. They share what feels safe and protect the deeper layers underneath. Often this happens automatically, but you still feel the wall. You notice it in conversations that stop right before real depth. You notice it in emotional distance that remains even during affection. They are not fully absent, but they are not fully available either, and that difference changes everything. Because eventually, many people start trying to earn access to what is being withheld. They believe that if they become patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, then one day the avoidant person will finally let them all the way in. But emotional openness cannot be forced through effort alone. The other person has to take part in that process willingly. And willingness is not only about desire, it is also about emotional capacity. You cannot build a fully developed relationship with someone who is only partially available. No matter how beautiful some moments feel, the relationship will always be limited by what stays hidden. Over time, that limitation starts changing you too. You stop bringing up certain needs. You lower your expectations. You become careful with your own vulnerability. Little by little, you start shrinking parts of yourself to fit the emotional limits of the connection. That is where the real emotional cost appears, because now it is not only their fear shaping the relationship, it is your self-abandonment keeping it alive. And that is a hard truth, but it matters. The deeper question is not simply whether they care. In many cases, they do. The real question is whether care without openness can sustain the kind of connection you truly want, because genuine intimacy is not built on partial truth, controlled closeness, or carefully managed access. It is built on the willingness to be fully seen, even when that feels uncomfortable. And if someone retreats the moment the relationship starts feeling secure, they may not only be afraid of losing love, they may be afraid of fully having it. In the end, this whole pattern comes down to a truth many people only understand after living through it again and again. What you are often dealing with is not just inconsistency, mixed signals, or emotional unavailability on their own. You are watching a deeper internal battle between the human need for connection and the learned fear of what connection can cost. The avoidant self is not always empty. Many of them feel deeply. They connect genuinely. They care in ways that are real, but those feelings exist beside another system inside them, one built on protection, self-reliance, and fear. So every time intimacy starts feeling real, that protective system activates. What looks like rejection from the outside is often self-protection from the inside. That is why the cycle repeats so predictably. Closeness creates activation. Activation triggers fear. Fear creates distance. Distance resets the system. Then once separation restores a sense of safety, connection becomes possible again. It is not a steady line toward intimacy. It is a loop that keeps returning to distance whenever the depth becomes too much to hold. And once you see that clearly, something important changes in you. You stop thinking the behavior is random. You stop treating every retreat like a mystery you must solve. You begin to understand that the pain often comes not only from the distance itself, but from what that distance makes you believe about yourself. When withdrawal feels like proof you are not enough, when inconsistency feels like something you must fix, when emotional limitation makes you question your value, that is when the cycle takes hold of you too. You chase, you overthink, you prove, you wait, you try to stabilize something that was never stable inside the other person to begin with. But when you start seeing the behavior through a psychological lens instead of a personal one, your whole emotional position shifts. You stop trying to earn consistency from someone who is not yet consistent within themselves. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to remain emotionally present. You stop shrinking your needs to fit someone else's fear. And you start measuring something far more important: sustainability. Because real connection is not defined by how intense it feels in rare moments. It is defined by how consistently it can exist without collapsing every time it deepens. True intimacy is not a brief emotional high. It is the ability to stay connected when emotions become real, steady, vulnerable, and lasting. And here is the hard truth. Some connections feel powerful but cannot carry their own weight over time. Some people can love in moments but struggle to remain present in continuity. Some bonds feel real in flashes, but cannot survive the responsibility of emotional consistency. Watch this carefully in your own life, because this is the line that changes everything. So the strongest move is not chasing harder. It is not trying to understand them forever while abandoning yourself in the process. It is recognizing the pattern, accepting what it is, and deciding that your emotional life cannot be built on inconsistency dressed up as connection. You can have compassion for their fear without making a home inside their cycle. You can understand their pain without turning it into your future. You can care deeply and still admit that care is not the same thing as compatibility. That is where real strength shows up, not in forcing clarity from someone who does not have it, not in waiting endlessly for potential to become reality, but in choosing clarity over confusion, steadiness over intensity, reciprocity over fantasy, and peace over repetition. Love is not proven by how deeply someone can move you in a few rare moments. Love is proven by how safely, steadily, and consistently they can stay in your emotional world when things become real. And once you understand that, the question changes. You stop asking, why do they leave when it gets serious? And you start asking the question that actually protects your future. Is this the kind of connection I can build a life on, or is it the kind of connection I keep healing from? Sit with that. Really sit with it, because the answer to that question is where your clarity begins, where your peace returns, and where your next chapter finally starts.